generally don't fight us on the police are not like the gatekeepers of safety in the country. Like people in general, like that's it. I do think that the movement next has to figure out how to create a critical mass of people with the skills to do something about it. Like I don't think we figured that out yet. And I think there's a style of organizing that happened in the civil rights movement that was essentially, and I just talked to a very well-known whatever, and he reinforced this idea. It was like we need to train up a new set of leaders, right? That was sort of like, I think that's how I would characterize like the civil rights movement. Like we're gonna empower a new set of leaders who will then lead people. I think that we are in a moment where I think we can actually train like a whole new critical mass of people, that it doesn't have to be about a new leadership class, that it can be about a new critical mass. And I like believe that as like a fundamental organizing principle, like that this isn't about like how do we make the next 10 charismatic whatever, but how do we make the next 2 million people who like understand the work and are willing to do something, and how do we organize them? I think that there are more people that want to do the work than know what to do, and there are more people that want to do the work than want to be members. So what do you do when like people like you probably don't want to, you might not have a schedule that allows you to sit in the basement of a church every Wednesday in an organizing meeting, which doesn't mean you don't care. And there's like a style of organizing that says that you don't come to those meetings, you're not a member. And I think that we have to figure out how to create ways for people to interact and like be in the space that like open up new spaces of organizing. Like I think that has to be a part of the work. And I will say that like we haven't articulated, I think the movement writ large has not articulated like a cohesive understanding of power, like what does power look like? And what I would offer in this moment, and I haven't written much in a while besides Twitter for a lot of reasons, but I would say that the philosophical framing that I think makes the most sense to me now is that trauma takes people's power away. That trauma makes people feel powerless, either makes them powerless or makes them feel powerless. And that part of our work is either to help people reclaim their power or for systems to restore their power. That is what the orientation to power looks like. So when you think about when you have felt powerless before, like what that looks like, when I ask myself that, I think about, when I was a kid and people called me a faggot or stuff like that, like when I didn't feel like I was worthy or like I was a man or like I was a boy, like, and then what would it look like for me to reclaim my power? Like how does that actually happen, right? For me it happened in classrooms and in schools and in programs, or what would it look like for systems to like restore power? And you amplify that times a gazillion in every minute of the day, and then you get racism, right? Like that's what racism is, like this ever-present feeling of, like this ever-present trauma that makes people powerless, or makes people feel powerless. And then what does it look like to restore power? Like that's when people think about restorative justice, what's being restored is not justice, it's power in the name of justice. We understand power to be agency and impact. Like, and I think that this restoration and the reclamation is important. That's what reparations is. Reparations about how do we restore power to people that have been structurally made powerless. Like, how do we do that? So I think that I believe that has to be the next part of the work. That what we did really well for 2 years is help people understand how to talk about the trauma. I think the next part of the work is help people figure out what to do now that we understand the trauma better. And that the trauma is more public. Like we always think the police are crazy or doing stuff, but like there wasn't a public conversation about it. And I don't think the movement figured out what to do with white people. I think that like there's a group of people who are like there should be a lot of black only spaces, and that makes sense to me. There's a group of people who are like we can't win alone. I think that makes sense to me, and I think that like the articulation of what does it mean to ally, I think is rough. Like I think that it changes really often in a way that and I sit in a lot of rooms now, and I'm even like, well, you got mad at the white person for not doing anything, then they did it, and then you didn't like that. And it's like, I'm struggling sometimes to figure out what the bellwether is for people in the movement about what we want white people to do. And I say that because the reality is, as a consequence of enslavement, white people have more resources and structural power, right? So for them not to be a part of the solution in a lawful way, I don't think makes sense because we don't have the numbers, like we don't have the numbers by design, and we don't have the structural power by design, which doesn't mean that we need to have equal power in the movement space, but we do need to just figure out how to articulate like roles for people so we're really clear. And I think that is space that like is still opening, that we've not yet. I see it change a lot, and I'm intimately involved in what's happening in the movement, and I think we got to figure it out. But I do think that there are a lot of people that want to do the work. I was in Baton Rouge. I was arrested there. Not on purpose, and I was in jail for 17 hours, and I think about those people that I was with in jail, like totally, they were like, they were ready to get out of jail and do something, right? And like, how do we organize them too, that doesn't require the like once a week sit in the basement of a church, but they were ready, right? And like, we don't have a mechanism yet to get them to do something when they're like ready. And they were like, I love you. They're like, I've never been arrested for something good. And you're like, I love you. You know, but people were ready, and I think there are a lot of people who are ready at all levels. I think about like celebrity, like there are all these people that want to do good work and don't yet know what to do. And I think that there's a style of organizing that says if you don't build a chapter, if you're not a member, if you don't build a 501c3 something, then you don't have power. And I think that is a dangerous way to think about organizing. That there's a way to organize that has infrastructure that doesn't require like a 501c3 organization. And I'm not always popular in the movement for saying this. Lord knows I'm not always popular in many places, but definitely the movement is that there are people whose livelihoods are like attached to these organizations, right? They're like, that's not new, that's not a new phenomenon. That is are they reading the nonprofit industrial complex thing in this class? No. You should read the opening.
Okay.
That's great.
Yeah.
But I think that is interesting. So that's the last thing I'll say. Open for questions or whatever you want to do next.
Yeah. No, I mean, so there's some. I'm going to open it right up to questions. So in terms of what this was about, I mean, I was actually going to say so much of what you said today. I was going to, so the point that I was trying to make is, Miles, can you just hit the next button to go to? Yeah. So one of the things that we need to understand is that you have a hashtag created in 2013 by 3 black women, right? Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrice Cullors. But then, you have the Ferguson uprising happening a year later in 2014, which has a totally different cast of characters, right? Some who are connected to the network that Alicia, Opal, and Patrice were connected to, and then others who are not. And so I kind of wanted to talk to you about that Ferguson moment where you have this, where you have really the beginnings of what becomes an internal debate within the movement, really, which is almost like the debate about hip-hop street cred, right? About who's from Ferguson versus who is not, who's a protester, who's a documenter. I want to talk about the moment that you and Janetta began We the Protesters. Can we talk about how that came into being and your experiences on the ground in Ferguson as a documenter, and this distinction between being a protester versus being something else, which is something I've heard, movement folk talk about. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that, we joke in the movement that like there were no attendance monitors, right? So like people will be like, I didn't see you. I'm like, I didn't see you either, right? When I got dragged by my ankles out of the lobby of the St. Louis City Police Department by the police, and this woman almost tased me, like you weren't there either, right? Like, so, there is a lot of policing of like who is where. And some of that is interesting because there are people who talk about the protests who've never protested, and like that drives a lot of people crazy, right? Because if you've ever been in a city where the police were really wild, there's some things you just won't ever do because like the consequence of it. And a lot of people are like, I'm gonna go out there with a gun and you're like, what city were you in, right? Because you don't know, like you haven't been sprayed in the eye with pepper spray or any of that stuff. Like, so that is like a real struggle. I think that, so the critique that you were very kindly alluding to, and I appreciate that, is this idea that I was just like somebody in Ferguson who tweeted, right? I wasn't actually protesting, I was like standing on the side of the street. And what I say is that so many of us had like discrete roles. So like I was a tweeter, there were some people who were the bail fund, there were people who were like the live streamers, like before Periscope, before Twitter video, like when Ustream was the only way, that was like the best way we could live stream. So we were all in it together, like we all played different roles, but like I was the person they would call, like I remember I was home, I lived in Minneapolis, so I was like commuting back and forth to the which was crazy. I got a call being like, Deray, there's a protest Friday night, can you fly back to like physically be here, because I had the largest platform. So it was this thing that like the police they didn't know what my body was, but they knew my Twitter handle, so they were like afraid if I tweeted it, it was sort of true. And the news media would treat it as like fact, right? If I was like, the police did this, they would be like, it was fact. So I would get all these calls being like, Deray, can you come to this? Can you? And like, I was one of the liaisons with the media, right? So like when we sat in the St. Louis City Police Department, I got a call saying they were doing it. I called a reporter at the major newspaper in St. Louis and said, meet me at this corner. I can't tell you what's about to happen, but like, you should be here because there's gonna be a story. And like, so that was what happened, but very few people saw that because like, I couldn't tweet, I just got the reporter to come stand on, like, that didn't work. So yeah, but people had a lot of roles to play. There is this tension about about Ferguson because a lot of people talk about it that weren't there, and that drives people nuts. If not only because it was so bad, you know? It was so bad. It was bad in the sense that the police were so crazy. Like, we couldn't stand still. And like people, we say that now, people are like, oh, that's really bad. It was like nuts to like literally have to walk in circles, like up this not super long street for hours, right? So people are like, oh, well, Ferguson was, like I was on a panel with somebody who is fairly prominent in the movement, and they said, and I almost like jumped through my skin, they were like, it's easy to protest, anybody can protest, but the real word is organizing. And you're like, nothing was easy about what we did in Ferguson, right? Like nothing. It wasn't easy to like be out there when the police were chasing you, or like when we got pepper sprayed, and like none of that was easy. So there is like this really interesting revisionism that's happened sort of 2 years later. And you know, we all don't all get along, like not everybody is one big happy family in the face of the trauma, right? Like if we're all outside and the police are crazy, everybody's sort of like squashing all their stuff. But if that's not the case, like there's some real tension inside the movement. Some of it's around like where money has gone, like who has money and who doesn't, like who has visibility and who doesn't. Is like those are real things that people are really frustrated by. And then people feel like Ferguson got forgotten, right? So I'm one of the people, I'm not from Ferguson, not from St. Louis. I drove down on August 16th, just like got in my car, ended up in St. Louis, planned to go for a weekend, turned into a much longer time. And I moved back home, right? Like I went back to Baltimore, ran for mayor, like all this other stuff. And some people are really frustrated, like why didn't I stay in Ferguson, right? Like why don't I talk about Ferguson more? And one of the hard things is that like when I was there, people were, you know, people were like, why are you ignoring Baltimore? Like people said, why aren't you going home? And I went home.
It was always somewhere else that you needed to be.
Yeah. So like that is, but I do, and I will say I have 500,000 followers on Twitter. I had 800 in August of 2014. And I do feel a responsibility to the platform to like amplify the work of other people, right? That is, I get it, that's real to me. But people don't think I do that enough. People don't think I'm gay enough. People like, so those are the things that sort of happen in the movement. And like people see, you know, Beyonce follows me on Twitter, which is like a thing for some people. And people are mad about that, right? And like da-da-da. So like the visibility thing and the money thing, and you know, there's some organizations that have gotten a lot of money, and people are like, well, where are your community events, and where are you, and like they don't know where it has gone, and people are rightly upset, and like that's something that people are trying, like the movement has not figured out a way to work through that. And one of the hard things that because the movement is not in like, there's, you know, the civil rights movement was like in institutions. It was churches, it was schools. There's none of that here. Is that one of the hardest things is that when we have conflict, there's not a lot of grace inside the movement right now. And there's no convener, right? There's nobody who can, because it's not church.
Mediator.
So the pastor can't get us all together because like people are like, I don't believe in God, and it's like that makes the church space a little hard. So it is, you know, Farrakhan, for however you feel about him, Farrakhan was one of the first people who like assembled sort of leaders from around the country at his house in Chicago. And nobody, because he's so intense, everybody was very chill because you're like, we're not gonna disagree with this, like, but there isn't a mediator, so we do have conflict inside, and like it's not, sometimes it spills out on Twitter, or like it spills out in these very public ways that I'm not always convinced like are the best for the movement, but there isn't another, like there's not a lot of grace inside. So I try not to fight on Twitter with people, but it's hard, right? Like it's not it's hard because there's not like there's nobody you can call, there's no mediator, there's no whatever.
Well, we'll get some questions. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really interested in like sort of what you're saying earlier about moving towards not just critique, but a sort of reimagination of the movement. Like I've been trained to think about theories of change as happening in three ways: of like personal transformation, demanding things from institutions, and then creating alternative spaces. And it seems like Black Lives Matter is doing sort of two out of the three. I think that there's personal transformation happening through, you know, non-hierarchical organizing, creating like sort of, I think protests, rallies, demonstrations are democratic spaces that create transformation. And then obviously there's institutional demands. But I'm interested in if the third component of creating alternative spaces is something that, at least from your position inside the movement, like it looks like it's positioned to happen, or if that's just not of interest. Like I'm thinking of Cooperation Jackson, I don't know if it's in Mississippi. It's like you know, the Black community of Jackson has like created an alternative solidarity economy, like specifically for themselves, where they set up schools, clinics, everything for themselves in order to be able to operate outside like white supremacist systems. And so I'm just wondering, like, if creating alternative space and community watch and all of that stuff is something of interest, or if that's just like, no, we're demanding institutional change and that's what we do. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. In full transparency, I think that there are people who are doing this who I'm not super close to, or I think that they might not be doing it the right way, but I think that they're doing it. Like, I think they really are. I think that there's some people who like are who've totally set up like a different way to think about neighborhood watch, right? Like a different way to think about safety that doesn't require involving the police. Like, I think people are doing it. I'm not convinced they're doing it at scale, and I am like addicted to this scale question, right? Like one of the things that is real, I believe to be true, is that like if the movement is like a fringe, if the movement, people who really are like sort of doing work, whatever that means to you, are like the fringe. Like I think this is gonna be like a really cool thing that people study that like dies out, but everybody has a sticker, right? I think that when people's grandmothers like stop caring, I think we have lost the movement. And I worry sometimes that people are like addicted to the fringe, and I think the fringe is important, and I consider myself like if being in the street is a part of the fringe, then I get that. But I'm not convinced that the conversation about alternatives has made it into more public spaces in a way that is authentic, right? Like co-ops, I think, are the closest to that. Like more people, regular people, are like co-ops to that. But I think about like things like baby bonds, right, which are like the way some people have proposed reparations, or like what would it mean if you gave baby bonds to every Black kid, or like what would it mean, you know, if you did home visits for a whole city, right? Like instead of just doing but I think some people are doing it. I'm sort of an institution guy. Like I think that like institutions, it wasn't hard for people to do slavery, right? Like it wasn't hard to build that. Like I think that it should not be hard to like have the correction. And I worry that people create an alternative because they think that making the system do it is actually too hard. And like I'm unwilling to continue there, but I think that other people like are doing that creating alternative thing in a way that I think is authentic. I think it makes sense. I will push about scale.
And just to push back, not really push back, but to add to that, I mean, I also think that it's important for us to not add, I'm always surprised at how much we expect of such a young movement, right? So it's really important for us to remember that the American Civil Rights Movement was a decade-long movement. Even the American presidency is a 4-year term, which we usually give twice over, right? So most US presidents actually get to have 8 years in office. The demands that we place on a movement that is only 3 years old are outstanding to me, right? So when people talk about these conversations about as if we are already at that point to talk about the success or failure of a movement, it's important for us to remember we're dealing with a movement that's 3 years old at oldest, right? But really, in some ways, really 2 years old, right? Because it really is the Ferguson Uprising that begins to bring Black Lives Matter into the national consciousness. And this is a movement that has already outlasted its peers, right? So Black Lives Matter has already done so much more cultural transformation than what Occupy was able to do, than what the Tea Party was able to do. So it's important for us to remember that we're dealing with a movement that's still, as Deray mentioned in the beginning of this opening, that it's a movement that's happening right now, and it's still in its early stages, right? So it's really important for us to let it be in its early stage and understand that transformation and growth will change and happen as long as we all stay committed to the work, you know what I mean? Other question, yes, Tiffany.
In the previous class, Professor Roberts said that Black Lives Matter, rather than being a civil rights organization, is a human rights organization. And I feel implicit to that statement is a radical expansion of what we traditionally imagine as the scope of the Black Lives Matter movement, arguably pushing it beyond our own national boundaries. And I'm wondering about your thoughts on the recent Movement for Black Lives policy platform that condemned the state of Israel as a genocidal state towards the Palestinians.
So I don't have public or private comments to make about the platform. I'm not a signature on the platform. I will say two things. One is that I get that this is not just a matter of policing, right? Like that makes sense to me. I get it. I also get that like the only thing that has gotten people in the streets is the police. Like that is it. And like I've been to almost every city in protest. And the only thing that has got like people, regular people, like not people who are like already in advocacy groups and stuff, but like regular people to come out of their homes has been like somebody killed by the police. And I think that there's something about that that we can't lose. Which doesn't mean that we shouldn't talk about education. And like, I ran for mayor, right? So like my platform when I ran for mayor wasn't just like the police should stop killing people. It was about vacant homes. And like, I get it. I think that I worry, the charter school thing is a great example. Like the NAACP just released this thing about charter schools, but it's all about like black people leading, right? And like I don't know how the NAACP at one turn is like, people should be able to make schools in their communities and and they're like, well, they shouldn't be charter. Like there isn't, and they're not proposing like a non-public school, non-charter third. So I think that there are a lot of platforms that have come out that do those sort of things, and I'm not interested in like the rhetorical flourish of a platform. Like, I think there are a lot of things that like sound great and like blah, blah, blah. I'm trying to figure out I think we have this unique moment where I get calls from people with a lot of capacity who I think have never ever thought about what to do, like would never like want to do something right now, who are ready to do something, and I think we have a responsibility in that moment to put out the really concrete things, even if they're really aggressive and imaginative. You know, like baby bonds for every black kid that is like we've never had a social program like that, like post sort of Reconstruction, all that stuff. Like we've just not done that before. That would be huge, and like. That to me seems like something we can pressure and I worry about some of the things I've seen that I think rhetorically are amazing. And then you're like, well, how are we going to scale this? And then it's like, I don't know. And like, I worry about that.
I mean, even the question when you think of, so we're going to talk a lot about here about abolition, right? But one of the things I always say about the abolition debate is that there's a profound irony in a movement that is increasingly abolitionist, calling for the abolition of prisons as we know it, that really in many ways began out of outrage over someone not being sent to jail, right? So when we think about Black Lives Matter emerging, the hashtag emerging.
Did you write that down? You should write that. You should write
But the idea that Black Lives Matter begins really about the outrage of George Zimmerman not going to jail, right? So it's kind of difficult to have a conversation about an investment in prison abolitionism when you have a movement whose origin point really has to do with a concern about actually sending people to prison. It doesn't mean that it's a contradiction. It means that it's a conversation that we need to have in our community and in this movement about, again, to again underscore exactly what Deray is saying about this balance between vision, long-term goals, short-term goals, that which is pragmatic, that which is prophetic, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So those are all, those are conversations that I think need to happen.
And I think when grandma doesn't get it, grandma does not get abolition. She, like, when you're like, grandma, there gonna be no jail. She's like, what? And like, what's your answer, right? And I've heard a lot of people who are abolitionists, and I'm like, what am I gonna tell my grandmother? And they're like, well, there's gonna be an alternative. And grandma is like zoned out the moment I'm like, she's like, what the alternative look like? And people like, we're working on it. And grandma is not for that. And like, I think that like when we lose grandma, I think we've lost the movement. Like what was amazing about Ferguson is that it was not just young people, right? It was like grandma and grandpa were out there in the sun like everybody else. Like that was real, And I think you're right. For some of us, the movement began when Mike got killed, but again, it was a call. It was about Darren Wilson being in jail. That is real, So like, I'm not against the route because people are like Deray, they say a lot of things. I mean that like, people are funding me to be a public voice for the movement and not be radical. But I'm just trying to figure out like what it looks like in the end. And I think that it's easy in these moments to get caught up in these rhetorical flourishes around whatever. Like human rights. My grandmother don't know what human rights means. She doesn't. She gets civil rights. Grandma has no clue. She's like, I don't know. Like she's like, I don't know why it matters to call it that, right? And I think that people who can't translate it to those communities, because what happens is that the people who say human rights, they say they are doing it in service of the most impacted, right? This idea of their proximity to trauma. They don't know. Like the people I was in jail with are not having 2-hour conversations about, they're not fighting about human rights, They're like, get me out of jail. I've been arrested too many times. And you could call it whatever you want. Call it civil rights, call it the game, call it, like they don't care. Do you know what I mean?
Okay. Yes, Angie.
So I was wondering if you could talk about surveillance on social media, because you're such a big social media person because of it, and what your experience has been with the increasing surveillance of minor activists and leaders from the police and also from more federal organizations through social media.
Yeah, I think that, they surveil us, right? Got it. don't know. I think the police want us to be afraid, and like I'm unwilling to sort of concede that to them. I do try to think about my safety, but not be afraid. The FBI's visited my house. I've had a movie theater got evacuated because somebody tweeted they were gonna kill me. I got arrested in Baton Rouge. All of those things, and I don't know. I feel like people know where I live. People know where I work. An inmate actually, I've never said that. You're the first people to tell it. This inmate like mailed me something at the office, asking for like my support, right? So like people know where I am, and I don't get worked up about it. People around me get really worked up about it, and that is actually one of the hardest things to manage. Like people, like when the movie theater got evacuated, I was pretty calm about it. It was awkward, and like the police came, it was like a big deal. The people I was with were like freaked, right? They like wanted us to go home, and like I don't know. So I think they do it. If anything, I think that the trolls on Twitter are like really organized. So some of the rumors that are out there are things that the trolls have just worked like the George Soros thing. I get another thing about George Soros. People are like, George Soros owns a house I'm in, has like paid all this money, and like there are people. The Open Society Institute does a lot of good work. I know them well. There are a lot of organizations in the movement that have gotten money from Soros, from his organization. His foundation is the Open Society Institute. I've gotten no money from, like, I've gotten no grant money at all, and not from George Soros. But but the way that the trolls have like organized this conversation about Soros is incredible. Like they've done it in a very effective way, and that I think is more damaging than the surveillance stuff. I think that the way that they have mastered the misinformation is really good. And you think about, so the guy that got killed in St. Louis recently, who was shot in the head, who was a protester, he and I did not have a good relationship, and he was someone who did not like me in any capacity. But the things he hated me for were things that trolls told him, right? It wasn't, like he and I didn't have a personal problem, but he was convinced that Soros gave me like a couple $1 million, like convinced from the trolls, and like that is really crazy. And like now that he has been killed, the trolls are starting to say that I got him killed, right? So like every time I go on Instagram, Facebook, they're like, he disagreed with Deray and now he's dead. And it is like, the number of emails and things I get about it are like shocking. And like the trolls have done it, and they've done a very good job of like creating, we already have tension in the movement, but they've done an amazing job at creating like more and more tension of things that actually aren't true. And that is actually really frustrating.
So we have time for two more.
I have to go back to Baltimore and go to work.
Okay, so yes.
So kind of going off of that question, how have you observed algorithmic functions of social media affecting the movement?
Did you say the algorithmic function? I can't even
Yeah.
say the word.
So Twitter obviously has the live feed, whereas like Facebook, like their algorithm's set up to where you're viewing content that your friends are most likely viewing. So like, would you say that there are certain social media platforms where it's easier to communicate the message of Black Lives Matter? Because like Facebook, for example, like has been cited to sort of decrease the visibility of Black Lives Matter. So I guess in your experience, has there been any one social media platform that's more effective than another?
I'm like a Twitter fan all day, like Twitter. I love Twitter. I think Jack gets it, the CEO of Twitter. And you know, I don't know why, Jack doesn't do a lot of interviews. He's a friend, but he doesn't do a lot of interviews. But he should publicly tell people that one of the reasons they bought Periscope is because of the protest. That like Vine is only 6 seconds, and he came down to St. Louis and and we were saying like we need to post video. And that's one of the reasons that they bought. Like we tested out Periscope before Twitter bought it. So I've had it for a long time, but one of the reasons they actually purchased it like is because of the movement. So like they get it. I think the functions are really different all of a sudden. There was a moment where like we just were trying to get out the truth, right? And like trying to have a public conversation. We've done it. I think, so now Facebook, people having those conversations and stuff like that, they weren't doing that way back when. Snapchat, I think, is interesting. Snapchat did that one, and I only know because I know the people on Snapchat, but they did, when Dallas happened, like right around the time of the Dallas, the police officers got killed, which I'm also being sued for contributing to. They
sued for contributing.
That I like got those police officers, like I got home one day from work, and like a guy was there to serve me a warrant, and it's really funny how like sort of people's idea of celebrity is, because people like want a photo or something. So the guy's like served me the warrant. He's like, "Can we take a photo?" And like, But when Dallas happened, Snapchat did their first Snapchat story around the protest. Like it was a story that they curated, and they haven't done it again. And I only know because they called me being like, "Well, you tweet the link out." But they actually curated like this fascinating, all these snaps of people barricading themselves in Dallas. Like because remember the Dallas shooting happened like at the end of a protest, like the protest ended, and they had all these amazing snaps of people like hiding in closets and all that stuff. So like that's been interesting, but they haven't really done that since. And people will snap me like from the scenes and stuff, but like it happens very infrequently. And I think Facebook's fine. I don't think they're really suppressing things like people think. Like I don't know. I know the Twitter people really well. Facebook is like a different beast. And Instagram, I think the algorithm on Instagram is interesting, and that is like a real algorithmic change. And Instagram is just on like a big restaffing. I don't know. There's some cities like Baltimore is an Instagram city, so the protests in Baltimore. Like, do you remember? I mean, you obviously remember the protests in Baltimore, but the reason it started was a threat that originated on Instagram, right? It wasn't a threat that originated on Twitter or Facebook. And like, Baltimore's a big Tumblr city. We've not seen Tumblr be a key player in any protest so far. But I think Twitter is still like I'm nervous about Twitter. Like, and as somebody who loves Twitter, I think that Twitter hasn't owned its. Like, there's no voice of Twitter right now. Like, Facebook is like, Mark uses Facebook in a very sort of aggressive way. I think that Facebook, when they did the safety check, was making a decision about how the platform was going to be used. When they did the donation, if you remember the donation, there was like a donation banner one day, and they raised like $1 gazillion, and they just tested it out. Like Google, the Google Doodle, I think is Google like using its platform to make a statement. Twitter has never done. Twitter, the only thing you've seen the blue bar come down is like the NFL, the Olympics, like they sort of don't use their platform in a way that I think actually has the most impact. They just rely on the users using it, and like I don't think I struggle with that, but I think they're like the most important one in the movement.
One more question. Don't hate me, but just in the purpose of.
Can we just stack these two? Can we stack?
Well, also, is there anything over here? I just want to be fair and balanced. I want to make sure I'm not losing questions over here. Nothing over here? Okay. Oh wait, Diane has a question. Okay. So we're gonna stack one and then one. One and one. Okay? Yeah.
Alright, so I was saying, I just wanted to go back. I know where you had really discussed like your sort of politics in the sense about how you wanted to integrate, like sort of restructure the system. I just wanted to understand like how you see a solution in that, just because like of course we've seen like even the police itself, like it is a system, like it's a system within a greater system, and it's like we've been almost like 400 years of like policing and things like that, which have already been oppressing us in a sense. So I'm saying how you see a solution in that, like there's like reform that's already happened, like body cameras and things like that hasn't really changed, it hasn't helped anything. So I'm just wondering like how you see that, like how you say restructuring system and then what you said about scaling. In a sense, I'm just wondering like what that's not.
Right, and you briefly mentioned, this is like a throwaway line, saying that people got mad at you for Beyonce following you back or something like that. And so I just wanted to hear your thoughts on how, when like celebrities like Beyonce bring Black Lives Matter to the mainstream and make it part of their musical platform, I guess you could call it. Yeah, like just how do you feel about that?
Yep, so good push, fair push. Like I think that there are people who, this goes back to what I said about, I think that there are people who we would never think would want to be a part of this space who like desperately want to do it, right? They're like, I want to do something. And I think that this is a question about like, what does it mean to organize? I think that what it means to organize is like everybody has to, I think when people who are organizers, who like sort of deem themselves organizers, talk about organizing, what they mean by that is like they organize like whatever their version of the most marginalized or most impacted is. Like that's how people like use the phrase. I would offer, sort of for better or for worse. I think that what I believe to be true is that we need to organize everybody, right? Like the lawyers need to be organized, like the artists need to be organized, the like singers, and I think we actually can do that. And I think that we can target people to like some concrete things. So I think about, we created the first public database of police union contracts in the country. I was in LA for like something else, and then did this dinner with all these like actors and actresses about what they do. So we start talking about the police union stuff, and they are literally like, we didn't know, right? They didn't know that the protections for the police are like in the charter of the city of LA. It's like crazy, da da da. They just didn't know. So they were like, who can I call? Where can I go? Like they were ready, right? And like I think that I believe that we can build some loose coalitions, but like focus them really tightly on like some concrete things. Or if we say we're gonna do baby bonds, I think that we can like train people how to talk about it in public. Like I think we can do that. That doesn't require like, it's not, I think there's a way of organizing that's like get 20 people to go to the Board of Education building and like make public statements, which is good. People, as somebody who works in a who's a chief in the school system, let me tell you, every time a parent or anybody complains, we gotta do a whole lot. But there are a lot of people, like a Beyonce, she's not going to nobody's board meeting, right? Which doesn't mean that she doesn't care. But the question is like when Beyonce or Common or Rashida Jones, when they say they are ready to put their whatever on the line, then what, right? And there's a style of organizing that's like, Beyonce, please just make a music video. And I'm saying here like a video is Beyonce's Beyonce, right? A video is powerful and important, but I'm sure we could think about something else for her to do that like uses her, like leverages her influence in like a very different way. And that's sort of what I'm offering for politics. I think that what you're rightly pushing on is that we haven't seen this before, right? The civil rights movement was still this idea of like train a cadre of leaders who mobilize sort of the masses to sort of press systems and structures. And I think that we can train everybody and like organize them in their sections. Like I think about the middle class in Baltimore, like the black middle class feels like they don't have space in that. They feel like they don't have space in the movement, right? Like that if they don't go out and protest because they're a lawyer from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. that they can't really be involved. They're not woke enough for that. And like that I think is like that way of thinking I think is gonna make this an amazing moment. Some of us will be people that they know their names and we appear on slides. But I'm the first person to say that like I'm in the political 50, one of the world's greatest leaders. I got an honorary doctorate from the New School. People are no more free because I have an honorary doctorate, right? Like I get it. And like we have to figure out how to like use the visibility we have and the access and the resources to create like a different type of power. And like I'm not convinced of the type of power that says like you need to have a chapter and a membership base is like the only way to do it. I think that is a real way to do it, and like people should, but I think there are people in the movement who literally are like, if you don't join one of these whatevers, like you don't have power, and like that is crazy to me. Like that is, like, does that answer your question?
Sort of, yeah.
What's the part that I didn't answer?
The only thing I was wondering is just like, just because like I'm a proponent of like remembering and understanding your history and just knowing that like something that's been done before, like these concepts that we're talking about, like I feel like some of them haven't been talked about in the civil rights movement, like some of that. Well,
Like what?
As huge of a scale with the technology and social media we have, but just like understanding, just that these things that we've done, like they have not worked. Clearly, we're still out here protesting for somebody, black women, black trans people, black, just everybody's being killed. Like why? Like how are we gonna fix this by just saying like let's talk to the law, the system, and things like that?
Yeah, so my push, so maybe I wasn't there. I appreciate this. I appreciate you continuing to push. Well, I remember when I talked to Diane Nash. Diane Nash was like, Deray, if we had listened to people, we never would have gotten those buses, right? Because they were like, don't do it. It's foolish. This is stupid. They're going to kill y'all. Don't do it, right? And she was like, Deray, we just had to do what we had to do what we thought was right. And like, people had never done it before like this, but we did it, right? And I think that is, so like I hear there's a history component to this, but we also know that people like made a history, right? That like the Freedom Riders, like they did it. I think about when I was in North Carolina and like was in the special archives with the North Carolina A&T, the Greensboro 4, that people had sat in before for sure, right? But when they did it that day, that was like a different way and a different context to do it that hadn't been done, right? So that's like one push. The second though is that, and this is what I think about Trump, is that I know people in the movement, maybe some of you, who are like, if Trump becomes president, what I keep calling, it'll force the system to come to like a productive apocalypse, right? That it'll bring the system to a grinding halt and da-da-da-da. And the system has never come to a grinding halt. It didn't under Reagan, it didn't under, but like, what it has done perfectly is grind us into ashes, right? And like, I worry that there's some people who are like, tear the system down. I don't think the system's going anywhere. I think that in like a Trump world, and I'm just using him as like an example of like the tear the system down, I think that we are gonna get like beat into mush Like today, Trump said like he wants to get rid of the FDA food police. You're like, that is crazy. Because they're white rich people who won't have to worry about the FDA. They will like own the country that like grows their food. It's gonna be poor people on food stamps when there is no more FDA saying like the food is able to be eaten or not, that are gonna be screwed. Do you know what I mean? And like I'm worried about that. So I don't love Hillary. I met with Hillary, met with Bernie, don't love Hillary. I would rather have Hillary than Trump, right? Because like the apocalypse isn't coming. I don't think it's coming the way people think it's gonna come, and I worry about that. I think there's like this revolutionary something that philosophically makes sense to me, but in practice, people want to cut the Department of Education. That like philosophically I get it, but as somebody who works in the school system, like if there was no mechanism for federal funding all of a sudden, you think schools are bad now, it'd be the Wild Wild West, right? And like I think that people, like I'm not convinced. So like I do think that we can, I was talking to Brene Brown, if any of you saw her TED Talk, she's great. She did this thing about vulnerability and shame, whatever. I was tweeting one day, she tweeted me back, we had a call. And I think that we could actually scale it. I think if we said, and again, I'm gonna start working on this when I leave the school system, but if we said we're gonna train or whatever, 500,000 people in 5 months, wild, right? The only person that has created an organization of just black people to something even that scale will be Garvey, right? Like Garvey's organization was like the single biggest organization of black people that we've ever had, right? That like people that call themselves members. And I think that we could actually so we have seen that happen before. It wasn't civil rights, the civil rights movement, they were in institutions and stuff, so it was like a little different. But I think we could do it, and I worry that there's a type of organizing that says if you don't do it one way, like it's interesting that like people are like we shouldn't have monolithic blackness, right? That like black is all these things and complex, but they reinforce this idea of monolithic organizing. Like that is fascinating to me. That if you don't read, whoever wrote